All right, everyone, we are about to launch lesson 9 here, which means that we are just one lesson away from finishing your training. And we're going to dial into the topic of stress. Now, the brain is the key organ of stress reactivity, coping, and recovering processes. Within the brain, a distributed neural circuitry determines what is threatening and therefore stressful to the individual or your client. Instrumental brain systems of this circuitry include the hippocampus, the amygdala, and areas of the prefrontal cortex. And again, these are all structures that we have talked about pretty often in this course. But together, these systems regulate physiological and behavioral stress processes, which can then be adaptive in the short term or maladaptive if they continue for the long term. More importantly, such stress processes arise from bi-directional patterns of communication between the brain and the autonomic, cardiovascular, and immune systems by way of neural and endocrine mechanisms that underpin cognition, experience, and behavior. In one respect, these bidirectional stress mechanisms are protective in that they promote short-term adaptation or allostasis. However, these stress mechanisms can then lead to a long-term dysregulation of allostasis in that they promote maladaptive wear and tear on the body and the brain under chronically stressful conditions or allostatic load, compromising stress resiliency and overall health. The brain fitness coach should have an understanding of the specific links between stress-related processes that are embedded within the social environment for our client and embodied, so to speak, within the brain, which is viewed as the central mediator of the load stress presents. So the brain is the central organ involved in perceiving and adapting to social and physical stressors by way of multiple interacting mediators, from the cell surface to the cytoskeleton to epigenetic regulation and non-genomic mechanisms. A key result of stress is structural remodeling of the neural architecture in the brain, which may be a sign of successful adaptation, whereas persistence of these changes when stress ends would indicate failed resilience. Excitatory amino acids and glucocorticoids have key roles in these processes, along with a growing list of extra and intracellular mediators that include endocannabinoids and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Stressors cause the release of hormones cortisol and epinephrine from the adrenal gland, and that's pretty much common knowledge. This is seen as an appropriate response in an acute sense. For example, when we face an immediate danger, but this is also something that can cause significant dysfunction in the body if it's experienced chronically. For many of your clients with chronic health concerns, coaching them to manage the stress in their life can go a long way towards achieving their goals. If your client is unable to address the cortisol released from stress, the coach might have a challenge on his or her hands. Now, since cortisol is naturally elevated in the morning and decreases in the evening, we might try to encourage clients to stay in sync with this cycle, and it might be by having clients do morning workouts or having their biggest meals before noon. Conversely, we might have the client switch things up in the evenings by eating less and relaxing. Additionally, we promote a stable, consistent bedtime, encouraging sleep at a normal hour, preferably before 10 p.m., and waking up between 7 and 8 hours later. Doing just these things on a consistent basis can really help clients a lot, especially as they try to stay in sync with their body's natural cortisol cycle. There is evidence that chronic or persistent stress may actually rewire the brain. Scientists have learned that animals that experience prolonged stress have less activity in the parts of their brain that handle higher-order tasks, for example, the prefrontal cortex, and yet more activity in the primitive parts of the brain that are focused on survival, such as the amygdala. This is a lot like what would happen if you were to exercise just one part of your body and not another. The part that was activated more often would become stronger, and the part that got less attention would get weaker. This is what appears to happen in the brain when it's under continuous stress. It essentially builds up in the part of the brains that are designed to handle threats, and the part of the brain tasked with more complex thoughts takes a back seat. Stress can lead to shrinkage in areas of the brain that are associated with the regulation of emotions, metabolism, and memory. While people often associate negative outcomes to sudden, intense stress caused by life-altering events like a natural disaster, car accidents, or even the death of a loved one, researchers actually suggest that it's the everyday stress that we all seem to face that, over time, contributes to a wide range of mental disorders. In one study, researchers from Yale University looked at 100 healthy participants who provided information about the stressful events in their lives. The researchers observed that exposure to stress, even very recent stress, led to smaller gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. Of course, this region of the brain is linked to such things as self-control and emotions. It is possible for people to adapt to moderate levels of stress over time. If we experience a stressful event over and over, the prefrontal cortex, or the command center of the brain, recognizes the stressor and tells your hypothalamus that stress response is meant to be short-lived. Experiencing repeated or long-term stress means that cortisol levels in the body remain high. But what happens if your body experiences high levels of stress hormones over an extended period of time? The stress eventually just becomes unhealthy. Over time, high levels of cortisol actually start to wear down the brain and other body systems. This type of damage to the brain has been associated with a number of health problems, including depression and anxiety disorders, as well as memory loss and dementia. Although some stress is good for us, too much stress over time can be harmful. And this just makes sense, but now we have to consider how it changes the chemistry and shape of the brain. Now, we can go on more about the science of stress, but what the brain fitness coach needs to understand is that when a client is under stress, there can be a negative influence or effects on the brain. And as coaches, we can try to mitigate these effects, but the nature of stress means that we will be trying a wide variety of strategies. Some of the superfoods, nutrients, or suggestions for exercise may help, but there will always be episodic stress, and that's unavoidable. The most we can do is to understand our client's stress level and provide guidance in the form of support, suggestions, and a healthy dose of science. Stress is known to physically alter the brain in terms of chemicals impacting brain morphology, gray matter, and white matter. The extent of this damage or alteration is often out of the control of not only the client, but definitely the coach. We always want to remember that we never carry our client's stress or burdens. We only provide direction for them to overcome stress, but on their own terms. We can assist and we can provide guidance and direct suggestions, but apart from knowing the effects of stress on the brain, a brain fitness coach is somewhat limited in terms of stopping stress in its tracks. The theme of this topic fits well as a transition to our final lesson, where we will discuss actions that coaches take to work with clients in order to be effective at optimizing brain health and bringing the whole picture of brain fitness coaching together.